for you and me. Another key change, oh God, oh no. Gig nightmares for you and me. All right, gig nightmares, talking music, talking gigs, talking nightmares, talking mind-thrashing sonic nightmares. Michael, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Doing very well. So, as we were talking about before, we first met at a Voivod concert in Philly in 2019, and we were both just like having our minds exploded from watching like the chaotic awesomeness of Voivod. So then, we were both playing in respective bands, but I was talking to you about your band, Nuclear Tomb, and just hearing like all of just like the cool stuff you're doing, like pursuing the sound of weirdo thrash and everything like that. And here you are, I guess 5, close to 6 years. 6 years? Yeah, 6 years.
Yeah, I think 6 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and obviously, like we've been friends on Facebook since then. So I see like a bunch of like the cool stuff you're doing. Like you got to eventually open for Voivod a handful of times, and this episode is going to be coming out on, let's see, March 5th, which I think is next Wednesday. Today's whatever. Anyways, but then the next day, March 6th, you guys are going to be opening for Coroner and Deceased at the Metro Gallery in Baltimore. And it's like, that's awesome.
Yeah. The opening for Voivod back, a couple years ago, that was a big deal. And opening for Coroner right now is pretty much just as big of a deal for the same reason, which is that that band that I play in, Nuclear Tomb, those are the two bands that I self-compare us to, and we get compared to by others the most often. As people will say, "Oh, you guys, I hear a lot of Voivod, or I hear a lot of Coroner in it," and so it's not just like, oh, you get to open for a band that has, popularity that you might like or not like or whatever. It's like very legitimately like those two bands are kind of the reason why we sound the way we do. So super excited.
That's awesome. So what has been sort of like, with a lot of the way that I see like you guys book tours and stuff like that and organize shows, it seems like a very DIY sort of approach to things. Do I have the right understanding of that?
Yeah, it's a DIY being, me being the why.
All right.
Nuclear Tomb for sure, and the other bands as well. Although in some of the other bands, I'm not the why.
Sure.
Yourself, doing it. So
sure. So just because like I have like a lot of musicians and a lot of non-musicians that listen to this podcast, what are some of the things that go into actually putting together a DIY tour? And you can also segue that into, well, what things go wrong on a DIY tour?
So generally, I think when you're starting to get into booking your own tour for your band, unless you're a veteran that's been doing it for a very long time, there's going to be a lot of kind of guessing. Anytime you go to a new place for the first time, you might have a contact from a buddy that's sort of like leading you in there, but you're going in blind every time. And especially when you're booking stuff out of town on your own, the level at which is like, there are a lot of shows that we play like on a tour that we have coming up in April, going through like Canada and the Midwest, where it's the first time we've ever been there. There's no promoter per se for the gig. I literally contacted the bands and the venue oftentimes myself. I got the flyer made. And so some of these places we're returning to, and I knew some of the bands from before, and I feel very confident it's going to be awesome. And the other ones, over time, you sort of gauge it better, but you're always going in blind. So that's kind of the central aspect of it that I think can be stressful and make it crazy. It's also one of the ones that makes it really fun. I don't have experience gigging at the like club level. I have buddies that play in bands where they tour multiple months of a year playing at like, 1,000 or more kind of cap venues every night. And I don't have a lot of experience doing that, but I would imagine doing that, the gigs themselves, to a certain extent, probably run together more than they do when you're doing it at the DIY level, depending on how you do it. But the way that I do it and my other bands do it, it can be so unpredictable. and have such variety and chaos to it. And that's kind of what I love about it, is the breadth of experience that you get. And it can be a little bit exhausting, and for some people, it might be kind of overload, too stressful, too degenerate, or whatever. But for a certain personality type, it screams adventure, and I think that's kind of the thing that drives it. So it's a lot of work booking it yourself. I've had some other friends I've made who are like younger people who are like just starting their first DIY metal band, late high school, early college age, and they're kind of asking me the same thing, like, how did you get started doing it? And you see somebody else do it, and you have the gall to think like, I guess I could do that too. And just like anything else involved with being a band, regardless of whether it's that sort of approach or not, you kind of suck in the beginning, and it kind of sucks in the beginning. And over time, if you keep doing it, you learn a little bit more and you get a little better at it. Um,
And hopefully you start to lose a little less money doing it.
oh, absolutely. And, without being too candid or whatever, we first started doing it, we were essentially operating at a loss. And now we don't. I don't operate at a total loss anymore. Maybe if I kept better accounting, it actually would still be a loss, but at least in the like immediate short term, you walk back having paid all your expenses and a little bit of money, which in the DIY context doesn't mean that you walk away with money. It just means that you have money to put towards the next thing. So,
You have gas to get to the next show, at least.
you have gas to get to the next show. You have money to print your shirts. You have possibly money to record. So that's like the best case scenario is you have enough money to record to where you can record without worrying too much about the budget and nobody has to throw anything in. Like that's the peak of it in my mind for what I see, which to a lot of people can be pretty crazy, and I don't blame them. But it's just a different world and different circumstances and different motivations and stuff behind it.
Awesome. So, on the topic of gig nightmares, since I believe you have a couple from your time playing with, well, it should be noted you've played with Nuclear Tomb, that's been your baby, but you also have a few other bands. You have a grindcore band named Ixia, what's the name again?
Ixias.
Ixias, okay.
Ixias, yeah.
I'll put that in the episode description because
Yeah, it's a tough one, and that's one of the funny things with the band is the mispronunciation of it, and then us having our own in-joke mispronunciations with it. Sometimes fucking with people at gigs when they come up to us and ask us the band name, or they mispronounce it, and we just roll with it. But yeah, the band is Ixias.
it's funny you mentioned that. I joined a metal band based down in Nashville called Etheria. Next week, I guess 2 weeks from now, so 1 week from when this is being released, we're going to be doing a short European tour, opening for Tarja from Nightwish. But I had someone come up to me because it's spelled Aetheria. I think I have that right. Etheria. And someone came up to me and they say, "How do you pronounce the band name?" And I said, "I don't know. I just call it Urethra."
Yeah, right. Anytime you have an impronounceable band name, it ends up getting more and more fucked up with your own.
Yep.
I think the worst one we had for Ixias was Itchy Ass. I like that one.
That's good. And then you have a speed metal band, Total Maniac.
Yeah, yeah. And those other two bands I joined around 2021. And we're already pre-existing bands that I came into because they're buddies of mine. They asked me if I was interested in playing with them, and we've done a fair bit of recording and gigging and touring and stuff with those bands. But it's a sort of different experience where I'm not the one running the ship. Some of it's collective and collaboratively, and some of it is just like there's some other dude who's the guy who's running the ship, and I just show up and don't get paid.
Sure. Some of them are your nightmares. Some of them are someone else's nightmares.
Yeah, so some of them are a little bit more somebody else's problem to deal with.
All right, so let's hear some of these stories then.
All right. Yeah, I didn't really have a full ranking of this or like an ebb and flow of I'm going to start small and get real crazy, but I've got a couple of funny ones between the bands. I'll start rattling off. One that I talk about often that I think I just talked about yesterday, 2 days ago with a buddy, was a gig that Total Maniac played in Pennsylvania. Um, and I won't get into, details of the venue or whatever, but we were playing a gig in Pennsylvania, and it was a gig that I kind of pushed the guys on. I saw this venue was doing metal shows and saw like flyers and stuff and had friends who had played it and heard good things and thought it was like going to be a pretty cool place. And by a lot of metrics it was. So I was the one who was kind of like, hey, we should play a gig here. And they were just kind of rolling with it. And it ended up being a fairly disheartening experience, even for me, who's somebody who has pretty thick skin and is hard to dissuade. Um, so what basically happened is we roll up to this place and we find out that Sepultura is playing in town the same night at a major venue. So we were immediately like, oh, we're fucked. There's going to be nobody here tonight. And then there was a ton of people there, and that was even weirder. And so the gig goes on through the course of the night. The crowd's there. It's cool. We're hanging out, and we're playing last. I wouldn't say it was one of those headlining gigs because a lot of people know there's times where you're headlining and there's times where you're playing last.
Yeah.
Usually implying that it's not a good thing, and this was kind of one of those. So we played last, and all of a sudden this place might have had at one point probably more than 100 people in it, at least close to 100 people in it, and it dwindled down to like a solid, including people at the bar, which is on the other side of this place, God, a solid 15 at best, maybe really like 6 right in front of you. So that was pretty disheartening. It's one thing when there's nobody there. It's another thing when there's people there and then they leave when you play. And then it's another thing when the 6 people who are watching you are not into it. The most not into it I've ever seen anybody be for this band. This band, Total Maniac, is a really over-the-top performance, and it's really funny. And it's the type of thing that when I have a band that I recommend to a buddy of mine who's not into extreme metal to come check out, I'm like, oh, come check out Total Maniac. It's fun. It's a good time. It's over the top. These people, I don't know what it was, but they were not in on the joke. And it kind of coalesced or peaked with this guy sitting on the stage as we were playing. This drunk guy, in this big empty bar where he could have gone and sat anywhere. So much open seating. Plants his ass down on the stage right in front of me. I'm not a really aggressive guy, so I just go up to him and I'm trying to like kind of play with him a little bit and maybe get into like, hey, maybe you should fuck off and get off. And so I go over and I kind of just lean down. I'm playing guitar next to him and ripping it up and making faces. And I think at one point I give him a noogie and I'm kind of trying to just get him to get off. And eventually he gets up and he goes over onto the other side of the stage with the other dudes and sits down. And that was a mistake because I'm not a violent guy. And I'm not going to say they're a violent guy. They're violent guys, but I knew this was going to happen. He sits down on their side of the stage and they immediately are just dropping knees on him, kicking him full force, just trying to get this motherfucker off. And I think he sat like directly on their pedal boards and stuff, like really bad. He's fucking up gear. So they're kicking the shit out of him. He comes back over to my side. I'm still not going to kick the shit out of him, but I am messing with him and fucking with him and trying to get him to leave. And eventually he fucks off. And at the end of the gig, I'm trying to talk my bandmates out of kicking this guy's ass. And then I found out on the drive home that as we were sort of loading out, this guy kind of bucked at one of us and said something. I won't repeat what he said, but it was, basically, it was fighting words. And after I heard that, I felt bad for talking them out of kicking this guy's ass. Even I wanted to kick his ass. And the real kicker was a week later or so, maybe a little bit longer. I was at Maryland Death Fest in Baltimore. I'm walking my car at the end of the night, and this guy's walking with me. He's walking parallel to me right now. I'm like, oh, shit, whatever. I'm just going to ignore him. He starts yelling across whatever parking lot or street at me. He's like, hey, don't I know you? Didn't I see you recently? And I'm fed up at this point. So I start, staring him down and yelling back to him, yeah, you're the fucking motherfucker who sat in our stage last week, you fucking idiot. And he starts muttering and kind of getting small like a cockroach and going in the other direction or whatever. But that was a story that I think is really funny, even though at the time it was a little disheartening. Have you ever had anybody sit on the stage or come into your space in a way that was very unwelcome while you're playing?
Sure. So I've played. I guess it was. I want to say two bands ago. It was just like whatever, like dad rock cover band sort of thing. Playing back home. I'm originally from like Northeast Pennsylvania, where you're playing like a lot of like gun clubs and like not exactly like places with stages, just like a big hall or whatever. So you're always playing like floor level. So a good couple of times, people are drinking too much, so they want to come up and sing or whatever. And I try not to be too much of a dick or whatever. But like, I remember this one guy. I think we were playing like maybe Bon Jovi, Wanted Dead or Alive or whatever. And I'm going through like the different patches on my pedal board, trying to get like all like the 12 string sound and then the distorted guitar sound. It's like I need all that. But then for whatever reason, like this one guy comes up to sing. I don't know if the singer invited him up or whatever, but like he comes up to sing and then he's just like standing right in front of my pedal board the whole time. And it's like, no, I gotta be. So, but now fortunately, I like Jackson guitars, and for anyone not familiar, Jackson guitars have really pointy headstocks. So anytime there's anyone that needs to move over, you just stab them with the headstock, and it's great. But unfortunately, now I kind of have a bad habit of that, where anytime anyone gets too close to me, like I just kind of just
Choke
jab
the
them
shit
a
out
little
of it.
bit. Exactly. Like so, like now with my '80s tribute band, if one of the girls comes over, is like singing something or whatever, and I'm like, no, get away from me. I just like, whoop, and yeah, then I don't know, it's fun.
I'm always whacking my bandmates and oftentimes audience members with my guitar,
Yep.
but it's usually through exuberance and an accident. But
Sure.
I've had a couple of times. I don't think I've ever whacked a bandmate too. Well, I did hit the shit out of our singer Dustin in Total Maniac one time, but I whacked the shit out of a buddy of ours who's maybe like Nuclear Tomb's biggest fan last year at our album release gig. Just because I'm a guy who throws my guitar, so a lot of times if there's a part I'm throwing my guitar around,
Yeah.
it's not faking it, it's full force. I'm hurting my own hands and body sometimes when I'm doing it. And this poor guy was just a little too close, and I whacked the shit out of him, and I kept seeing him after that, so I kept getting to see, oh, the swelling's gone down a little bit. I'm really sorry, man. Oh, you still like us. Stand a little
Yeah.
bit further back next time.
Yep, it happens. My very first gig with the '80s tribute band, we were playing like a big theater, like maybe 500, 600, whatever seat theater and whatever. We're we do like a lot of like theatrical sort of stuff and whatever. So like we're playing like We Got the Beat or something like that. We have like these beach balls that we're like trying to like get people to throw beach balls around and whatever. And one of them ends up back on stage. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like kick it out into the audience. It's gonna go up. But like every time I've tried doing it without fail, I kick it and it just goes right to someone in the whack
Right in the
someone
baby's
right.
face.
Yep, every single time.
I feel like I've seen that happen a couple of times, going to some like metal festivals and stuff. People will end up throwing beach balls around. It gets on stage, somebody kicks the shit out of it, just whacks somebody.
Yep.
Um, yeah. Uh, I got another funny kind of disaster story I'm thinking of right now. That was a Nuclear Tomb gig.
All right, let's hear it.
So this was a tour we did in 2022 um, with some friends of ours called Desolus, who are a thrash metal band also from our area. And it was just the two of us in a DIY tour. So we're renting a van, like a 15 passenger van or whatever, sharing gear and all traveling in it together. So just a bunch of young adult being degenerate metalheads. A lot of fun. And the third gig into it, we're playing at a house in Atlanta, Georgia. So, for those of you who may not be familiar, it's very common in the DIY punk and metal scene for house gigs to happen. And they're essentially like glorified house parties most of the time. If you're lucky, if you're really lucky, there's a solid like 40% ratio of people who are really there just to like see a gig and interested in music to the 60% of people who are mostly there to party, but will probably also be in your set having a good time and enjoying it. And that's like the lucky numbers. So they can get pretty crazy sometimes. Sometimes they can be pretty chill, but this one was not chill. It was very much unchill. It was also awesome. It was a gig that I love and have fond memories of, and we would in theory go back to the place. So we're playing at the house. I think maybe the first kind of like weird red flag thing we came in is there wasn't a working bathroom. I don't even really remember them offering a solution besides maybe like, oh, if you go like half a mile up the road, there's a Walmart. kind of a sketchy neighborhood too, where they were able to get away with doing a house show. It was like a weeknight, like a Tuesday night,
Oh
for
wow.
metal bands blasting in this, fairly crowded neighborhood. Um, so that was weird. There was no fucking bathroom. And we're playing the gig inside in like, I guess, a living room. And it's pretty tight. I've played a lot of house gigs before, and this was one of the tightest in terms of the band was able to set up fine, but the space, essentially the audience space, it's all floor level, immediately in front of where the band is playing, and then the wall is really small. And it's a, extreme metal punk gig. So the audience is not static. They're moving a lot, and you're moving a lot, and so there's a lot of collision and
Sure.
violence happening, which is a lot of fun. But it was real tight. So the first couple of bands are playing, it's cool and everything, and then all of a sudden during the second band, uh, somebody, or I guess a group of people, pulls out a bunch of Roman candles. Like each person has their own Roman candles, and they all light them at the same time. And these are, they like kids, they're kind of like punk high school kids probably. And they all start shooting these Roman candles off inside in the room while the band is playing, like at the band, at each other, multiple Roman candles going at the same time. Pretty fucking crazy. We all were basically trying to scatter like cockroaches and get out. The poor fucking band that was playing, I feel like they took it in stride, thankfully. Some girl passed out, had to be carried outside, and they were airing the house out. And then they moved the show outside where they had like a makeshift stage placed. And our friends Desolus were the band that played outside after that. And it seemed like it was almost a different gig. There was like tons of people there. It was this big mosh pit, people going crazy, and it was awesome. And then some neighbors start showing up and complaining. I think like an old woman down the street started hobbling up with the hammer, saying some shit about how she was going to slash somebody's tires, and the cops show up, and so we moved the gig back inside for our set, and we're the last band. And at this point, it's well after midnight, and me and some of the other guys in the band are sort of huddling up and talking about, if somebody fucking lights a firework while we're up there, we're putting our instruments down and we're jumping them. We're like, I don't even know if I'd say we're fed up at this point. But we're like, we're not taking that shit, right? No, we're not taking that shit. Um, and then the final thing that kind of like capped this off is I had blown out my voice uh, in the tour 3 days in from
Oh.
smoking, uh, smoking a lot and doing aggressive death metal vocals and not knowing my limits at the time. So I had completely blown my voice out to the point where there was no question of me doing vocals. Literally couldn't produce enough sound to do it. And it was a crazy DIY punk gig. So we did what bands often do in that kind of situation. We just handed the mic to the crowd. And people kind of fight over it and start yelling. And, some people do a surprisingly good job. And some people, they hand it to their buddy who's their coworker who ended up at the gig. And he's just going, ah. And then for like 2 minutes. And it was a crazy, raucous, good time. And at the end of it, we made some money and sold some stuff and had a blast. But that was a pretty fucking, the people setting off fireworks inside was a pretty fucking crazy one. It's not the first time I played a house gig where people were setting off fireworks inside. In fact, the first gig I ever played, somebody did that. But this was like several kids lighting off Roman candles at each other at the same time. It's pretty bad.
I mean, would you be surprised if I told you you're not the first person to tell a story like that on the podcast? I think
No, I
episode
wouldn't be
10.
surprised.
I
Because,
think
like I said, the first
yeah,
gig I ever played, one of the guys in the band had a bottle rocket rig set up on
yeah,
his bass.
exactly.
Shooting off bottle rockets in the ground. It was awesome. Permanently changed my perspective. So it
There you
seems
go.
like it's a running thing.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That was a fun one, and that was a really fun tour. I think that the bulk of my most interesting stories, perhaps not the most disastrous, although some of them are quite disastrous, come from a tour that I did with Ixias, which was a European tour
Oh
that we
wow.
did, which is also the longest tour I've ever done. It was like a 3 week European tour with Ixias that was still very much so a DIY thing. So you're playing all sorts of places. And now doing it in Europe, this is the first time I ever traveled out of the country, and I think it was also that for maybe one other member of the band as well. Um, and it was sort of centered around this festival in the Czech Republic that's a grindcore focused fest, although it does a lot of stuff, called Obscene Extreme. Have you ever heard of this before?
I think I might have.
Yeah, if you ever are interested, check it out on YouTube. They've had like really good pro shot footage of bands playing it for years, like going back probably a decade. Obscene Extreme, and their tagline is open air freak festival, and it really is that. It's like there's a lot of camping happening for a lot of people that are there, a lot of drug use and general degeneracy, um, a lot of nudity as well. Uh, Only vegan food. The guy who runs the fest is a vegan and has been. This fest has been going on for like I think over 20 years.
Oh wow.
And all of the food there is vegan and honestly really good. I'm not a vegan myself, but I don't have a problem eating vegan food, and the food they had at this place was delicious. But it's basically just like a weird dirty metalhead hippie fest with a bunch of people being real goofy. There's another thing about this festival is there's no barrier on the stage, and it's actually encouraged and part of the culture for people to get up on the stage while the bands are playing. For all the bands, even the headliners. The headliners, some of those days were like Carcass, like major metal bands that are definitely not used to people hopping up on stage, but I'm sure they know the deal when they sign up for it. But and they have lots of security and stuff. And generally, if you're up on stage for a little too long, they'll kind of gently push you off. But it's really not a problem. People end up policing themselves fine. Nobody's trying to fuck with the band members. Um, People are just getting up, usually in like ridiculous costumes and just stage diving or doing some goofy little dance and hopping off. Um, and so this was the fest that we ended up playing and booked a tour around doing this, basically just to financially cover us flying out to do this because what we were getting paid to do the fest wasn't enough to cover like flights and all the expenses for all four of us to travel for Europe. So we booked this whole 3 week tour um, around it. And some of the really funny stories involve playing in even like coming from DIY punk culture in America, really bizarre spots coming from that perspective. So one of them was a gig that we played in Poland um, that was on like this small island where there was only two buildings, and one of them was an abandoned church, and the other one was like a dance club with like a little man-made beach area on the side of it that in the basement looked like a degenerate squat that bands used as practice spaces. And that was where we were playing. We were playing down in the concrete basement. It was almost like a dungeon, uh, playing in this practice space. And we were the only band playing. Uh, and the space is sort of like a art collective and ran by people that are into like weird experimental performance art, improv music, which kind of works well with what we do because that band Ixias has an improvised portion to our set, and it's not uncommon in grindcore to do that. Oftentimes, it's called like noisecore, where like straight up people are sort of like doing like noisy sort of grindcore based improvisation. So we're the only band that played. So we play our normal like 20-minute set because grindcore, it's extremely short songs. You're playing like, I don't know, way more songs than most of my bands would play in a 30-minute set, but you're done in like maybe 20 minutes if you're dragging it out. And then after that, we spend another solid 20 minutes doing our improv shit. And then after that, the crowd, which thankfully there was a crowd there and they were into it, it turns into this free improv jam that lasts for hours and hours and hours until like 3 in the morning,
Wow.
maybe. Uh, there was a reggae jam at one point, and I didn't know there was like Rastafarian, like white Rastafarian dudes in Poland, but God damn it, there is, They love ganja just as much over there as we do over here. And you're meeting all sorts of interesting people offering you all sorts of interesting stuff. We got offered this vodka there. I think it was vodka. It was some clear liquor that they kept calling the bull piss. And it had a leaf inside of it. And supposedly the thing is like, oh, a bull pisses on this blade of grass. And that's in there. Honestly, one of my favorite gigs I've ever played in my life was that one. Just a good vibe, cool, interesting people, a bizarre atmosphere. And in terms of everything going off as well as you would hope for it, it went fine. And there were other gigs that didn't go like that, that weren't quite as fine. There was a gig that we played in Slovakia, um, outside of I guess a bunch of like storage units, like ground level outside storage units, um, in sort of, I don't know if it was a rural area. It was just on the outskirts of the city. I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been Bratislava was where we were playing in Slovakia. But it was a weird situation. You're on the side of the highway. There's a bunch of people there. I don't understand how the cops weren't involved. I think some of the people involved in the gig just kind of said that they know what's up and they don't really care. God bless them. It wouldn't work over here. Um, and this gig was pretty awesome. We were playing with a bunch of extremely sick bands. There was a couple of tours that were all verging at the same time. So we're playing this awesome bill with a bunch of great bands, and there's a good crowd, and it's a good time. We're loving it, but we end up playing last, and we're not really sure why we're playing last. And we're getting drunker and drunker as the night goes on, and the night's getting longer and longer and darker and darker. By the time we get up there, it's pitch black. There's not a lot of floodlights going around, so we're having a really hard time seeing anything. And we're playing in complete open air on completely borrowed equipment because it should go maybe without saying that when you're doing a DIY tour at this level and you're flying out, you're lucky if you have your guitar with you. So you're essentially borrowing equipment and using different equipment every night. So it can be kind of nightmarish sound wise. And this one was absolutely nightmarish sound wise. This might have been, in terms of pure execution of the musical performance, the worst gig I've ever played in my life. I like to think of myself as a big performer and somebody who hopefully, even when we're fucking up, can kind of mask it and just try try performing more and kind of just lean into it and have a good time and hopefully distract people from how terrible we are. But that did not happen this night. This night, I was just staring at our drummer the entire time, wincing every time we fucked up, every 5 seconds, and just struggling to hold on for dear life. And everybody could see, especially our drummer, who had a poker face the entire time, which worried me even more. I couldn't tell if he could tell that we were fucking up. And our singer was completely oblivious to this. For him, this might have been the best gig we ever played. And I think he had a great fucking time. He got a guy to strip down completely naked at one point, and this guy remained naked for the rest of the concert. At one point, I didn't see this, but everybody else verifies it happened. I don't know what he said. Obviously, it was in English, and a decent amount of people here spoke English. I don't know if all the native Slovakians did, but he got a bunch of people to throw their shoes at him, kind of like raining shoes at him as he's screaming. So he's half naked himself. So he's just running around, rolling on the ground, running into people, yelling shit, saying really bizarre stuff in between the songs that could be interpreted as controversial as well. Real nightmare shit. And at the end of it, I go over to our drummer and I'm kind of having the, oh shit, we kind of got to go through and talk about what we fucked up in terms of like this song here, that song there, kind of go through it so we can work it out for the next time. And our singer comes over completely oblivious and just thinks that it was the greatest fucking gig that we've ever played. He had a great fucking time. Everybody had a great fucking time, which is probably true for the other people involved. But it was a night that I will never live down. And I still speak of very frequently with the drummer of that band. If we don't see each other for a while and we're hanging out and we're getting deep in conversation, it'll probably come up at one point. That one was pretty hellish, regardless of the fact that there was a naked dude, which I guess was on the plus side of it.
So I'm not exactly familiar with all that many like DIY tours happening internationally. So like, can you tell me a little bit about that experience? Like, how much of your gear did you actually get to take then?
All right, so I'll get into some details about this because there's some pretty funny ones. So here was the plan of what we had is we all brought our guitars. Our drummer brought, I think he might have brought his cymbals. And his snare and some of the other drums that he got was something that our singer coordinated, sort of like renting, I guess, from somebody when we got there. But he brought some portion of his drums, a very small portion, and the rest of the kit was sort of assembled hodgepodge while we were there. I don't think it was a full kit though. We assembled like sort of the breakable portions of the kit, cymbals, kick drum, snare, that sort of things, and we're using backlined kits every night. In terms of guitar amps, our singer is a big tech guy, and he's big on constantly. It's a band where he is the guy in this band. He actually writes all of the music, And he's even like sort of in charge of the tones and stuff. He kind of will constantly be altering the rigs and giving us new pedals and new amps and stuff, much to my occasional hair pulling frustration. Uh, but for this tour, what he had gotten together is a while ago, a couple months prior to that, he had bought a quad Cortex. Are you familiar with those?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't, and I wouldn't be if it wasn't for this. I'm outside of that world. But an amp modeler, right? I guess is the
Yeah.
terminology for it, and had it set up so that we were all going into this quad Cortex. One guitar and one bass essentially. Um, there were tuning changes because there was one song in the set where we were in a different tuning and he had coordinated that. It was the same tuning but lower, so he was easily enough able to coordinate on that. There's different patches we're doing for different sounds. This is not what I like to do with Nuclear Tomb. I'm like very much so. I plug into my amp. I have a very basic pedal board, and most stuff stays on all the time. Uh, so it was kind of hard for me to adapt to that, but it gets a lot worse before the tour happens. I think the night or two before the tour, the last practice we have, the thing gets knocked off of the cab that it's on. Don't really know what happened, but it bounces off, it falls on the floor. I got no idea what fucking happened to that thing, but man, it did not take it well. It was going all sorts of haywire, and we did use it at the first gig on the tour, and it was not cooperating. Really, really not cooperating. We were cutting in and out constantly. It was a fucking nightmare. So we had to abandon it at that point in the tour after the first show. We got 19 gigs left, and a
Hmm.
festival coming up in like 3 days. So we're pretty worried at this point, and we're running on a shoestring budget. Um, we as a band and personally didn't really have the budget to save ourselves if we needed saving. So the pressure was on. It was kind of stressful. So what he did is I think he got a pedal that is like a amp preamp, I think, and then maybe another pedal. But basically he was trying to get it so that he could get like amp preamp pedals to use as the amps that we would use and just use on other people's backline cabs, which we're already going to be doing anyway. We're going to be using backline cabs anyway for the tour. And so we did a little bit of that, but it wasn't working very well either. Not completely breaking, but the tones were just real hard to get the way that I wanted them. And I think something with that broke it too at some point on the tour. So for the back half of the tour, every night I had to go up to one of the bands and ask to use their amp every single night of the tour. Which I don't know if that's something that you've ever had to do. Have you ever like had shit break and had to go up to somebody and straight up just be like, "Hey man, can I use your amp head tonight?"
I mean, when I first started gigging in my first band, I just had to, like, my main amp was just like 40-watt Fender Champion, which
Yeah,
wasn't really amazing. So, like, there'd be several shows where we would open for other bands, and they would see my pathetic 40-watt amp, and they'd say,
and sort of
"Dude,
offer you.
yeah, exactly."
Yeah, I had that happen in the past when I was real young and getting into it itself and using really shitty combo amps or whatever. And I've had a couple of times where I have had an amp blow up, maybe one, two times where I had an amp blow up on a gig or something went wrong and we
Oh,
straight up had to borrow somebody else's stuff. And that happens occasionally. And usually people are pretty understanding because it's a nightmare and stuff happens. I've also offered that to other people, helped other people out in that way as well. But this was different. This was every single night of the tour.
yeah.
It's sort of a meme. I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but it literally, there are like memes of it like, "Hey bro, nice set. Can I borrow your gear?"
Yep.
And this was that, and not just borrowing gear that's sort of typically backlined and shared, but borrowing your amp head every single night, going up to a person I didn't know and having to coordinate that. So that's the extent to what can happen. I don't think that's what always happens on DIY international tours, but that did happen on ours. And there was never a problem. Thankfully, everybody was super accommodating. And I think I would be as well because, an international band traveling on a shoestring budget, coming to your country. Thankfully, people were just really appreciative of it and were trying to help us out and make it work. But man, that was a tough one to swallow, having to do that every night.
So, just a personal question, since again I mentioned I'm leaving for that European tour. Well, I'm more or less. I think it's going to be the Friday that this episode comes out. So I've never done like any fly gigs or anything like that before. So I've just been doing a bunch of research.
Yeah.
I'm taking like my 7 string and like my line 6 pedal board and whatever, and I'm gonna try to like just like take the neck off of the body and just like put that in my backpack and just have that as my carry on. Because
Yeah,
like
you're gonna do
I
the
know
take the
like a
neck off thing.
yeah. Well, how
Yeah,
did
that's
you
a
do
common
it?
thing that I've heard people doing. I think our singer did that with the guitar, transporting it at some point. We didn't do it with our guitars for that specific thing, but that's a common one that I hear about because, I'm sure we both heard lots of stories about people having the guitars break on flights.
Yeah. Wait, so did you do yours as like a carry-on or checked baggage? What did you do?
Oh, so I've traveled with guitars in the past, not for gigs, but sometimes I have parents that live in a different state, and when I visit them, sometimes I'm flying in and I bring a guitar with me, or sometimes I go there and then I buy a guitar with the intention of leaving it there, and I like it a bit too much, so I'm flying back with it. Um, and when I do that, usually it's an acoustic guitar, and I just force it as a carry-on. And I don't know that that would work for an international flight, but for flying from Maryland to Alabama or Maryland to Atlanta or whatever, I'm usually able to just kind of argue with them a little bit. I don't really like get into it too much. If they argued with me that much, I just put it as a check-in. But I kind of just have it with me, and most of the time they don't say anything. A couple of times they say stuff, and I'm just kind of like, oh, but it's my thing. And they let you do it, and I think that's definitely the safer option is having it as a carry-on. Um, I don't know if that could fly on an international flight though. We checked ours on an international flight. We actually did something kind of funny with the way that we checked them. We had the guitar and the bass both in this like one kind of road case set for two guitars.
Yeah.
Padded the fuck up, with stuff. And I think the bass guitar was actually inside of like one of those soft cloth upright bass cases as
Oh,
like
okay.
padding inside of this thing. But we checked them and we made it really heavy duty so it would work, and didn't have any problems with it. But yeah, it's scary checking your guitar. Taking your neck off if you're comfortable with that. I'm not. I'm not. I don't really work on my guitars on that level. But if you're comfortable with that, that's probably the safest bet.
I mean, that's probably what I'll end up doing. But then, like, with TSA, like, there's all these other considerations. Like, okay, fortunately, my drummer for the tour, he needs to, like, well, take his drums over and, like, he's has, like, a lot of luggage to check. So, what I plan to do, I can't, like, take my multi-tool with me. They would confiscate that. I probably can't take strings with me. And when I take the neck off, there's, like, the screws, to put the neck back on there, the screws that hold it in. It's like, well, they would probably confiscate that also. I'm just assuming because
Yeah.
yeah, I
Well,
mean,
are you
obviously
doing
it's
any
just
checked bag or you're trying to only do carry on?
I'm trying to make this as cheap as possible.
No, I got you, man. I'm the same way. But yeah, I think you're right if it was a carry on. If you
Yeah,
checked a bag, it wouldn't matter. But yeah, if you're only doing carry-ons, that's a smart thinking because I think you're right. They probably would confiscate all that.
probably. Well, we'll see. Again, this
Yeah,
comes
there was
out.
a lot of putting
Oh,
stuff in people's personal bags to get through because when you're a DIY band touring at international level, um, your merch, you're not like shipping merch over, and also sometimes there's different legalities that you might be skirting by in terms of
yeah.
the way that you're operating, which is the truth of how it works. Sometimes even for bigger bands. Uh,
Yeah.
so you're stuffing shirts that you're planning on selling inside of your own personal merch. Or I think we padded out actually our guitar rig or our traveling guitar hard case with a couple of different merch items and stuff like that. So yeah, sometimes you have to be creative with the way that you're hacking stuff to try to get it over.
Sure.
Yeah.
uh, any other stories that come to your mind?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other particularly interesting ones from the European one, that European tour we did. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff. A lot of it is probably more interesting to me and the other people who partook in it than it would be other people. But there was definitely some really bizarre um, venues and situations that we found ourselves in. Oh, I'll tell one story that is actually objectively fucking funny, but I'll have to leave names of bands out of it, I think. Um, so we were playing a gig in, give me a second, see if I can think of it, and I'll move on if I can't. I think it was in the Czech Republic, but I don't think I can remember the name of the city right now. But I think it was somewhere in the Czech Republic. Oh, actually, it was in Prague. It was the second gig that we played in Prague. We played a gig in Prague early on in the tour. We played actually a second gig in Prague, and we played in a squat, and that, you know, is sort of an eyebrow raising thing when you say that to an American. But what squats are and the way that squats operate, especially in like DIY music culture in Europe, is like a totally different thing. Um, when you think of squat and you're thinking of it from an American perspective, you're thinking of like a dilapidated windowless building with all the utilities shut off. Or
Sure.
like people are kind of just like, you know, hovering inside of and you know huddling together to get warm or whatever. That's not what this is. These are basically like, you know, large buildings of various designs. Some of them are residential, some of them are, you know, various other spaces. Some of them are sort of like art installations. Some of them are almost full-time venues. This one was absolutely a venue. It had a stage and a nice PA. I played with a lot worse PA some at some places that are, you know, traditional venues. Um, but it was a squat, and that's how it was termed, and that's kind of how it operated. Um, Essentially, though, it was a fucking venue. You know, it had a bar, it had a nice stage. I think there were people living there, and it was a giant art installation. So the whole place is covered in knickknacks that are not just sort of like posted up in the walls, but are coming out at you. Things weaving in and out. And it was a really interesting space to be in. But when we pull up to this venue, it's sort of in a sketchy street and a sketchy looking building. And we're not too intimidated from it by it. We're from Baltimore, Maryland. Uh, and we played a lot of sketchy places before, and so it doesn't really phase us much. But as we're pulling in, another band that's playing the show is coming out in their van, and it's like two bands in the same van. They're traveling together doing that thing, and the driver kind of rolls down their window and looks at us and is giving us the, you know, cut it out, you know, or like maybe like, hey, you want to like get the fuck out of here, kind of thing. And we're like, what? And so we start trying to talk to him, and he's like, yeah, we like rolled up, and there was these two dudes, and there was a gun on the table, and so like we're not going to go in there right now. We're like, oh shit, that's fucking okay. We'll hang out for a while. So we're hanging out basically just at the end of this street, where if we go further down along this building, it was the last spot of it was this place we're supposed to be playing. And maybe after another 30 minutes, we start making our way over there to kind of see what was up, at least drive the van over and kind of pass by. And we're going out, and the coast looks pretty much clear. We definitely don't see a gun. We don't see any dudes yet. Maybe somebody comes out at some point and we say something to him, ask if it's the spot. And he's like, yeah, yeah, come on in. And we come in, and by this point, I think some of the other bands were arriving as well. We go in the back. They have a bunch of food set up, and they're ready to feed us and stuff. And that's a thing that does not happen in DIY culture in the US. You're like almost never fed at gigs, but DIY culture in Europe, every gig they are feeding you hot food and figuring out a place for you to crash, whether it's there or somebody else has a place they're putting up. Every single gig, you don't have to worry about finding
That's nice.
accommodations or food. Yeah, it's really nice. And I'm sure at higher levels it must be like that as well, because they're doing that on the DIY level, you know. Hopefully I can prepare you to experience some good accommodations. That's how it was for us, at least. Oftentimes it was pretty dilapidated accommodations in terms of spaces you end up in, but I don't really give a shit. You're kind of used to doing the thing we do. And this one, we didn't have to figure it out. It was already figured out for us. So
Yeah.
we're there, they're feeding us. We walk into the venue, we see there's a nice stage. We're really confused. We're kind of thinking like, what the fuck were these guys seeing? What were they freaking out on? Eventually, at one point, one of us inside sees a BB gun on a table. I'm talking like orange plastic tip BB gun rifle on a table. We can only assume that's what these guys were talking about when they rolled up. Um, the other bands that were playing this gig, besides one of them, were all Americans. One of them was from LA. Um, one of them, I think, was from the Pacific Northwest. And there was us, and there was a fourth band that was a European band that was traveling together with one of the American bands, sharing gear and stuff, sharing a van. And the three American bands are having a great old time. We feel great. We are so excited to do this. We're talking about how awesome this place is. And the one band still hasn't come in. And we kind of start figuring out, oh, they're refusing to load in their gear or step foot in the place. And they're sharing gear with one of the other bands. So now we're figuring out how we can pool our gear and stuff together to have them play the gig. But this one band doesn't come in and doesn't play the gig.
Huh.
And it was really a bummer because there were people there to see them. People were talking about how they were bummed that they didn't get to see this band. And the gig was great. It was an awesome time.
Did you ever find out why that band didn't show up?
What'd you say?
Did you ever find out why that band didn't show up?
They were sketched. I mean, they were sketched out by the place. I do think that they legitimately were sketched out by it. I think they also legitimately didn't have a reason because the crowd too, like the crowd that came to this gig, a lot of these places that you play, they're like some of the weirder places. The crowd isn't necessarily like a crowd aware of your bands coming to see your bands, um, or even just like fans of that style of music coming to check it out. Sometimes it's kind of like artsy people and just people involved in that scene and that collective. This wasn't that. This gig, all the people there were grindcore people who were fans of these bands coming to see these bands who had like, specifically come to this gig to do that. And it was a good crowd. There's a bar there. Uh, maybe outside there might have been like a used needle somewhere outside. I'd believe that. It is that kind of neighborhood. However, no bad vibes, nothing going on in this place. Everything is functioning fine. Certainly not a rifle or anybody intimidating around. But they were sketched out. They thought it was beneath them, I guess, and they were freaked out and they didn't play the gig. And they left. And they left with their van that they were sharing with the other band and all their gear. And I think they just fucked off and went to go drink somewhere. Um, my opinion of these people isn't very high. However, at the end of the gig, we end up getting ready to go back to the place we're crashing, the place they have organized for us to crash. I can only describe as an Antifa dojo. And what I mean by that is it's literally a dojo. It's in this building that's like looks like these sort of like high rise, maybe not high rise is the right word, but like tall apartment or condo buildings that are sort of in a um like a square shape hollowed out in the middle with a courtyard that comes down. I don't know if that's making sense me explaining it. And this room that we're in on the bottom of it is like a karate dojo with mats out and shit. And I called an Antifa dojo because it's covered up in like political stickers and stuff. And we're in this space. So obviously it's a space that's used by people that are like activists, I would say. So we jokingly called it the Antifa dojo. And we get there, and the really weird thing is the band that, ditched the show or whatever is still coming here to crash, which we thought was really weird.
Yeah.
If I was them, I would definitely be too ashamed to do that. They were not. So they spent the night here. And it was a little awkward, nothing super weird. Nobody was going to be weird or mean or aggressive about it, especially the band they were touring with, because they still had to tour with that band. But it was a little weird, and people were definitely side-eyeing them and, whispering and talking about shit. Um, and we're partying and having a grand old fucking time. We're all out in this courtyard, huddled together, a large group of us, because all these bands ended up back here. So it's maybe like, 20 people, loud Americans huddled around at, 1, 2 in the morning, passing around beers and joints and things like that. And, just having a good time and getting to know each other and shooting the shit. At some point, we start disturbing some of the people that are, living here. And this babushka, who we never actually saw, at least I never saw her, somewhere up on one of the upper levels of this, starts yelling down at us. In what I later heard from one of the people who was there, who was one of the European dudes who was sort of housing us, who was a Czech guy, said that she was speaking Czech, but it was very bad Czech, and she was obviously Russian. I was like, oh, okay. So, this babushka was yelling down, basically, normal shit you'd expect. Like, I'm going to call the cops. I'm going to throw this shit at you. Fuck you. Get out of here. I'm trying to sleep. Fairly reasonable stuff, And so when that happens, we all just kind of we jump down, kind of get low to the ground and just immediately shut up. Everybody's dead quiet. You could hear a fucking pin drop, and there's this reverberating echo of this ominous Russian grandma yelling at us. We have no idea what she's saying, but we know the content. And it doesn't really scare us off. Maybe some of us go inside for a minute, but we're kind of still there. We're trying to be quiet. Every once in a while, a light will come on somewhere, and we all just fucking hunker down again. We're afraid somebody's gonna. I remember at one point one of the guys is joking, like, dude, I kind of think we should get out of here. What if she fucking like throws boiling water on us or some shit? That was sort of made up in our own minds to be this really grand, hilarious story. Um, at one point during this, she comes out, starts yelling at us again. One of the guys in the band says something along the lines of like, man, we definitely got to go inside, but we definitely got to finish this joint first. To, a round of applause. And we eventually make it inside, and one of the dudes in the band that bailed on the gig that was sleeping there is asleep, and he's snoring. Not a weird thing, but this guy snored the loudest, most obnoxious, bizarre snore I have ever heard in my life. This room was like a large karate dojo with a hallway leading out to it, which then led out to this courtyard. When we were out in this courtyard, all 20 of us partying with the doors open to this place, we could hear the guy snoring outside. That's how fucking loud it was. A typical thing that happens, I think, amongst punk rockers is they love posing with people that are asleep. I can't really explain it, but it's just a thing they like to do. So there were maybe a couple of pictures taken, maybe with the flash on, maybe not. People posing down and making faces next to this guy. But that's essentially the crux of what happened in this story. Maybe no big punchline or anything, but that was a very eventful night. Definitely one that I will not be forgetting anytime soon.
Night at the Antifa Dojo.
Yeah, Antifa Dojo, the babushka, the like weird squat. Like something else I remember from that night that I thought was really funny is our drummer got locked into a game of chess with this cool looking Czech dude that kind of looked like a pirate or something who didn't speak a lick of English. And Adam was playing chess with this guy, maybe for hours. I don't know. I know they played two games and they each won once, but it seemed like it was taking a long time and they were deeply engrossed in each other in this silent game of chess. Really interesting, bizarre night.
Man. It's fun. Most of the guests that I've had so far on this show have been people who have just been doing it for like decades and decades. But it's fun interviewing people more like around my age. Like I'm 25 now. You're not that much older than me. How old are you again?
I just turned 28.
Nice. But it's like it's fun interviewing people close to my age group because it's like, I mean, we're actively doing this thing now. We're having like our stories happen. But then it's like, well, I mean, I hope to be doing this show like years and years from now. So it's like, it'd be fun to like then talk to like all the people that I've interviewed now at this point and then be like, all right, what else have you been up to?
What was the next crazy thing that happened?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I mean the craziness of it and like the chaos that I talked about DIY touring is definitely my attraction to it. Um, I've always, kind of had like an adventurous spirit at heart, I guess. And this is the way that I actualize that. This is the way that I get to like go be Indiana Jones when I wanted to when I was a kid, is I get to like do this shit. And it's definitely not for everybody, but you meet a lot of cool people and you get to do a lot of cool, interesting stuff that's sort of outside a lot of other people's realm of experience, even like other musicians and stuff. I'm also one of those guys that I've been, I guess, doing it long enough, or maybe it's just my personality type or whatever, to where I'm very much so like a gig is a gig guy. Um, I kind of just all take them as the same. And usually, even like irregardless of turnout, I kind of don't really care. Nice turnout's nice when you get paid and you need to worry about getting paid. But the only thing that really bothers me is fucking up really bad. If nobody's there and we kill it, I feel great because it didn't matter that nobody was there. Because, the type of music we play, a lot of it is feeding off of energy. It can be harder when there's no energy to feed off of on the other side of the stage.
Sure.
But when you still kill it anyway, that's a great feeling. But when there's nobody there and you fuck up, you didn't impress anybody that night. You didn't even impress those three people in front of you. Those are the only rough ones. The true gig nightmares are those, which thankfully, as you go on, you have less and less of them. But, I don't think anybody is, maybe unless you're at the stadium level or the arena level, nobody is out of their occasionally playing a bum gig state.
Yeah.
At least for me, it seems like people that I know that operate at a higher level that are buddies of mine, maybe a different level of bum gig, but it's part of the way it works. This last weekend on Saturday, Nuclear Team played a gig in Roanoke, Virginia that we headlined, and I think like 80, 90 something people paid to come into this, couldn't be more than like 100, 150 cap venue. And it was awesome. It was crazy. And the week before that, we played a gig in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and it was snowing there that night. It wasn't really snowing in our area, but it was snowing there that night. And we decided we were going to go play the gig anyway. And we played in like a probably 200, 250 cap room to like 15 people.
Honestly, I'm surprised that show still happened. Like my gig that night got canceled because like the roads everywhere were just terrible.
It wasn't too bad. I didn't feel weird about doing it, and I we did kind of know going into it there wasn't going to be anybody there, but the canceling gigs is just not in my MO. If it was actually unsafe and we knew it was going to be unsafe, it's a different story. But if it's like, oh well, it's a little bit of snow, but shit looks fine. We're gonna go do it, even though we know that there's a higher likelihood that it's going to be a bust because it's snowing there. On the flip side, we played a gig in January in DC that I booked on a Thursday for some buddies who were in town that were on tour, and we were headlining. And it was a Thursday night. I booked it. It was snowing during the gig, so I was pretty worried about it. And that gig, we also had almost sold out the place, in a
Nice.
100 cap room venue. So you never know what's going to happen. And as it goes on, it's generally better and better, and it's more of that and less of the playing to 15 people. But I kind of like the unpredictability of it because it keeps it interesting.
Sure. With the 80s tribute band, my very first summer playing with the band, there was like a stretch of like maybe 5 shows in a row for like 4th of July weekend. The Saturday, I think we played at this one club down by the Jersey Shore, and we did something like 13 or 1400 people. But
Wow.
then the next day, Sunday, it was an afternoon gig at like a public park, and I think it was just like 30 people in wheelchairs, just
Mm.
like complete polar opposite. And but I kind of like that because it's humbling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You should be humbled. You
Yeah.
know, yeah, no, I agree. It really doesn't bother me too much. It only bothers me when I can tell that the other people in my band are bummed out. Like when they're like kind of like uppity about it, and that kind of rubs up on me. But thankfully that doesn't happen often. And if everybody else is having a good time, I'm having a good time. I'm also a guy that values the hang and likes to, party and hang out with people. So if there's nobody there, but the people who are there are really cool, and fun to be around and a good hang, uh, I got the majority of what I was looking at of the situation, unless we
Great.
sucked that night, in which case, then I'm gonna get the fuck out and drive home.
There you go. All right, so before we wrap things up, is there anything you want to be promoting? As we mentioned, there's the March 6th gig at a Metro Gallery in Baltimore, opening for Coroner and Deceased. There's Terror Labyrinthian that came out last year, which is a killer album, I gotta say. Is there anything else you want to be promoting?
Um, yeah, I'll talk about a couple of things between the bands. But yeah, Nuclear Tomb put out an album last year called Terror Labyrinthian. You should check it out. We're deep in the process of working on the second one, hoping that it should be out next year. No details on it yet, really. If you come see us live, though, we'll be playing definitely new songs. It's not just going to be material from the album. And depending on when you see us, it might even be entirely new material. We've actually already done that. We played gigs this year where we didn't play a single song from that album just because we're trying to get this new material ready to record. Um, the big thing that I'll hype up with Nuclear Tomb right now is we have a tour coming up in April, starting April, I think, 10th and going through April 20th, or maybe it's April 11th. Basically starting in our area around Baltimore. We're playing Philly, Worcester, Massachusetts, Quebec City, Canada, Toronto. So we're going up to Canada for the first time international for Nuclear Tomb, which is really cool. And coming back mostly through the Midwest. So we have a gig in Detroit. We have a gig in Indianapolis, St. Louis, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Pittsburgh. So there I just listed off every fucking city. But I'm the one who booked it, so I know
There you
all of
go.
them off the top of my head. So we're playing those cities. If you're interested, you can go to our social media and you'll probably see a flyer for that tour and check it out. We're really excited. Some of those places we're coming back to, some of those places we're going to for the first time. Um, that's the big thing we got coming up is that tour that we're really excited about. I'll talk real quick about Total Maniac. Nothing is announced yet, and we're still shopping around to labels, but we got our second album done. It's going to be called Love Overdrive. It's a concept album about fucking a car. That's not exactly true, but if it's a tagline to get you interested, I'll say it. Um, and it's going to be a really fun album, and I'm really excited for people to hear it. So, keep your eyes open in the next year or so for a new album from Total Maniac called Love Overdrive. Nothing new to report on the Ixias front. Our singer actually moved to Belgium. He married a woman out there, so he's living there right now, and there will be stuff happening eventually. But right now he's, dealing with his new life in Belgium.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right,
You
awesome.
got anything coming up, man? You got to let me know if you're ever playing in my area, man.
Oh,
I'd love to
absolutely.
be like Philly or something, you know. I'd love to come see you play.
We do like the casinos around Philly pretty often. We're going to be at a Parks Casino sometime in April. I don't remember when.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it might be like the day that you guys start your tour, so that doesn't
Oh,
really
well, I'll
work.
be in Philly at least. You know,
Yeah.
it would be the first time I've managed playing a gig and bouncing to the other side of town to see somebody else.
Yeah, literally Thursday, April 10 is when we're going to be at Parks Casino.
I think we're in Philly the day after. It's the Friday.
Ah.
But damn. Yeah, but that's cool, man. Thanks for having me on. I had a great time. I wish I had fully thought through and maybe prepared a couple more things. I'm sure there's some stuff that I'm missing, but you know, it's hard to think of.
Well, again,
When you've been doing it for a lot, it's just kind of whatever stuff comes first.
yeah. Well, again, I'll interview you in like 5 years or sometime.
Yeah, there should hopefully be some new interesting ones by then.
Awesome. Great. Well, hey, it's a pleasure catching up with you. Thank you so much for being a guest here on Gig Nightmares.
We'll catch you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Gig Nightmares. Gig Nightmares is an independently produced podcast made possible by the support of listeners like you. If you enjoyed this week's episode, we would appreciate if you left a rating and a review for us. Gig Nightmares.